Welcome to The World Awaits.
Travel tales to inspire your wanderlust.
I'm Kirstie Bedford, journalist, editor and travel writer.
And I'm Belinda Jackson, author, travel journalist and columnist, and we're your weekly co-hosts.
We're starting our podcast with a fresh new name and a few nips and tucks as we bring you great travel stories from Australia and around the world.
And stay listening for the special guest question we're now asking each of our guests at the end of our chat. Trust me, you'll want to hear the answers to these. But first up, let's talk about Skytrax's World's Best Airline Awards, Belle. They've recently come out, and Singapore Airlines took top spot from Qatar. It's the fifth time Singapore has won, and I must say, having flown Singapore many times, it doesn't really surprise me. It's the food, service, it's all pretty good. But I do have to say, the last time I did fly Singapore was pre-pandemic.
I'm surprised, actually, that Qatar was bumped for Singapore. I just did 4 flights with Qatar Airways recently from Melbourne to Turkey. The first super packed flight out of Melbourne was pretty ordinary, but after that, every aircraft felt shiny and new, the food was great, the service was kind. And you know, Kirstie, the flights really depend on the staff on the plane on the day. And look, I am the mistress of the second-tier airline. In the past year, I've flown Malaysian, Royal Brunei, Oman Air, and Europe's notorious budget carrier Ryanair. And I find it really depends on the crew and how they treat you as to how good the flight is, although no amount of good service can disguise soggy sandwiches.
No, nothing can disguise soggy sandwiches. And back here in Oz on the awards, we actually had our national airline drop from top 5 to 17th place. That was pretty interesting find as well. It was said to be due to service levels falling, mishandled baggage, delays and cancellations. But since the survey, Qantas has actually taken some pretty significant steps to change the way it operates, including having a new management team and announcing a heap of additional flights. And there's some new routes that are actually opening up from October too, and the expansion of Wi-Fi on board, which will be great news to everybody, given I find the Wi-Fi is almost non-existent most of the time I'm on board. So I think if the survey was actually held now, we might actually see a bit of a different result.
Oh, I hope so. Qantas's reputation has taken a real battering over the past few years, and in my eyes, justifiably so.
Right, well, let's just get into it. So who are you chatting to this week, Belle?
I caught up with fellow travel writer Ben Groundwater, who you'll see every week in the Traveller section of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, and you'll find his travel guides on the shelves of all good bookstores. He is one busy man. But if you get in quick, Ben's also leading a couple of food tours to Spain next year with World Expeditions. In his former life, Ben was actually a tour guide. He's happily shared some of his top Spain eateries and eats, which we'll include in the show notes. You're going to be hungry, Kirstie. Take a listen. On the show.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Belle.
It's an absolute pleasure because we've got quite a few things in common, apart from both being travel writers. We both love Spain. Love.
Yeah, and I think we both feel that it's maybe a little bit underrated by Australian travellers. Even though it's one of the most popular tourism destinations in the world, I feel like Australians maybe don't appreciate just how much there is on offer there.
Yeah, possibly. Barcelona has really suffered badly from over-tourism. Maybe that's just where everybody stops in this enormous country.
I guess so, yeah. I guess Barcelona and Ibiza as well, or, the Balearic Islands, certainly, I think people are pretty familiar with. And to an extent, probably Seville as well, and maybe Granada, all of which are incredible destinations. But yeah, there is so much more. And I feel like, maybe it's just my personal group of friends, but having a look at my social media at the moment, it seems like every single person I know is in San Sebastian right now, in the Basque country. So obviously that is on the map too. But that still leaves us with a huge, huge country to explore and appreciate. And I guess it's the kind of place that rewards return tourism, going back a few times and giving yourself a chance to go to those amazing places like Barcelona and stuff, but then to explore a little further.
Well, I think actually the whole San Sebastian thing might be your fault because you loved it so much. I mean, you even moved your family there to live and eat for a year.
I did, yeah. I feel like the blame goes back further than that, but to probably to Anthony Bourdain, who was the one who I discovered it through, and I'm sure so many other people discovered it through as well. But yeah, I've always loved San Sebastian. I've always visited there a lot, and always really enjoyed it for numerous reasons, but mostly the food and the drink and the sort of social culture that goes with that. And so in 2019, conveniently just before the world changed, my family, my partner and I, we had our first son, our baby, and my partner was on maternity leave. So we decided to spend the year in San Sebastian. And so I was just working my normal job there, and obviously Jess was on maternity leave. And we had a whole year to kind of soak up the culture and the atmosphere and the style of the place, while also looking after a child, which is not the easiest thing to do with a very young child. But, we made our way, and it really was an amazing experience, a life-changing experience for sure.
I followed you on Instagram, and I think you were also responsible for me packing on a few kilos. Ben's eating, I'm going to eat as well. And that's now the basis of you leading a World Expeditions food tour to San Sebastian, aren't you?
I am, yeah, which I'm so excited about. I've designed the whole thing. It's basically the 7 best days that we had in a year in terms of food and drink. I've condensed into a 1-week tour, and just hitting all of my favorite places, going on all my favorite day trips. We've got one tour which is sold out already, which is in May of 2024. But we've just put on a second tour as well in very early October of 2024, which we've only got a few bookings for so far. So that if people are interested, there is still a chance to jump on board with that.
And it's through World Expeditions.
It is, yeah, that's right. World Expeditions. If you just Google that, you'll find it pretty quickly. But yeah, it's going to be a lot of eating. It's going to be a lot of drinking. There's a bit of hiking in there as well. A lot of people don't realize that the Camino de Santiago, the famous pilgrims trail that goes through the middle of Spain, from around Pamplona to Santiago de Compostela, there's actually a northern way as well, the Camino del Norte, which follows the northern coastline and which actually goes through San Sebastian. So we're going to walk a small part of that from San Sebastian in the opposite direction to a place called Paella, which is this little village, little port village, basically a fishing town, and visit a couple of restaurants there, which are super amazing, beautiful. One of them is an old restaurant from like 1888, I think it opened, and they have their live seafood tank in this restaurant is a basket that is dropped into the river, and so all these sort of crayfish and everything live in this basket in the river, and whenever someone orders one, they've got a pulley system and they pull the whole basket up out of the river in the middle of the restaurant. There's a space in the middle of the restaurant, and so they pull this basket up and grab whatever they need and then drop it back down into the river. It's really cool.
I love it. Spaniards are really gloves off when it comes to food. They just know how to live. I was in Andalusia at the end of last year, travelling by train from Seville south to Jerez and Cadiz.
Yeah.
And the only tourists I was seeing, groups, bus tours, individuals, they were all Spanish. And I was talking about it with a Spanish friend. She said, well, what's the point of going anywhere else? We have great beaches, the food is great, I can eat well after 10 p.m. Can you do that in your country? Maybe in Melbourne you can, but everywhere else it's a bit of a struggle. So tell us, what are some of those rules for eating like a Spaniard?
Well, I was going to say, actually, when you were talking about Spaniards holidaying in their own country, one thing that probably takes people by surprise and that you should know before you go is that Spain is basically... It's not really a country. Like, there is no Spanish cuisine. There's barely even a Spanish language. Basically, it's a group of disparate regions that have all been sort of smushed together and exist, partially happily under a common rule. But every region that you go to in Spain has its really distinctive differences. The Basque country where I was living, they have their own language, they have their own food, they have their own traditions, they have their own festivals. Andalusia in the south is completely different to that. Totally, totally different. Everybody knows about paella. Paella you only find in Valencia. If you find it anywhere else, they're just doing it for tourists. It's not really part of the culture. All the festivals are different. There are different languages in so many of the different regions. So when we talk about Spanish food and Spanish traditions, it's really hard to kind of sum up the whole country, because everywhere you go will be slightly different, and the food that you'll find will be slightly different. I think probably the thread that ties it all together is a really deep feeling of conviviality and social socialness, if that's not even really the right word, but the idea that everything you do is shared with friends, that their whole society and their whole dining culture is structured around meeting up with people and enjoying other people's company. And that's something that I really missed so much when I came back to Australia, and I still miss. It's that, it doesn't matter if you're in San Sebastian or if you're in Seville or Madrid or Barcelona or wherever, everybody goes out pretty much every day to see their friends and have a drink, usually alcoholic, and to have a snack. And I was talking to a guide in San Sebastian, and she was talking about how Australians just go out to eat so much. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, Spain, you guys go out to eat every single night. She's like, no, that's just pinchos, or that's just tapas. That's not, then we go home and have a meal after that. That's not eating out. So they don't even consider what they're doing to be eating out. It's just such an ingrained part of their day-to-day life. So yeah, a lot of people will have dinner at home, and they'll have that about 9 or 10 o'clock. And so before they do that, you get hungry, obviously. So there's a meal called merienda, which is around about 5 p.m. So if you go past a bakery at about 5 p.m. in Spain, it'll be full with people having a pastry and a coffee just to get themselves through to the next snacking time, which is around about 7 o'clock or so. And that's when you go out for your tapas. And tapas can be a whole meal. You can do a ia de tapas, which is a tapas crawl, or a pinchos crawl if you're in Basque country. That's kind of a fine thing, but mostly that's not really how people take this. Mostly you go out for one little snack and one drink every day to meet up with friends in a bar and have a chat. And it's people of all ages. Kids are out playing in the square. Grandparents are there, parents are there, people of all ages, all sort of walks of life gather together to have these snacks and to have this drink, and then to go home and have their proper dinner. And I just absolutely love that. And that's what Spanish culture is to me, or what Spanish dining is. You'll find different foods everywhere you go, but that idea of going out to meet friends and enjoy others' company, that's what holds it all together.
I think you're so right. And speaking from personal experience, even as a solo traveller, you can get swept up into it, even being drawn into groups because you're sitting there all alone, all sad. So if you had to list your top 3 places to eat, where would you go?
Oh, do you want individual restaurants or bars, or do you want towns, or how do you want to attack this?
Give me a town, give me a restaurant, give me a bar.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I mean, obviously for me, San Sebastian is the pinnacle. Barcelona is a fantastic place to eat. Madrid is great as well. But for me, San Sebastian just has such a rich culture of not just of that social aspect that we were talking about, but of inventiveness with cuisine. There's a real passion for trying new things, even though there are some really rigidly adhered to traditional recipes. There's also a culture of trying and creating your own different foods. They have these things there called chocos, which are gastronomic societies, basically. And these are clubs that people join, kind of like a sports club, except the sport is cooking. And so they have these clubhouses called chocos, and you go there every Sunday and you take turns cooking for your friends and showing off and showing them just how well you can make a thing or what you can create. And so that's the culture that this is coming from. So for me, San Sebastian, there are a bunch of different sort of classic recipes that you can have, but you really can't go wrong if you go out in the old town or in the suburb called Gros, which is just nearby across the river, and eat there. You're in heaven. There's really no way that you can. There's really no bad food. And the best thing is, if you go into a bar and you're not sure, most bars will have a specialty that they do better than anything else. If you go into that bar and you say, "Hey, what's your specialty?" they'll just tell you. Like they're not going to think, "Oh, here's a dummy that I can sell off yesterday's cod to." They are proud of what they do, and they will say, "This is the thing that you should be having. Have that." So I really like that. Now let's talk about restaurants. My favorite restaurant in the entire world. I don't think you have to have fine dining to enjoy yourself. But my favorite restaurant I've ever been to in the world, and I've been there a few times now, is a place called Asador Etxebarri, which is in the Basque Country, not in San Sebastian. It's about an hour out of San Sebastian, and it's a legendary grill restaurant. The Basque Country has these things called asadores, which are grill restaurants where people cook over fire. And this one is kind of the original high end asador. So a guy called Vitor Aguinzones is the chef, and he's just obsessed with produce, obsessed with cooking over fire. Any restaurant that you go to around the world now, essentially, that is doing this whole cooking over fire thing, they're doing it because of Etchebarri. Like in Australia, Lennox Hasty, who runs Firedoor, who's an incredible chef, he trained at Etchebarri. Dave Pint, who's in Singapore doing burnt ends, he trained at Etchebarri. There's a sort of family tree of people who have been at Etchebarri and are now spreading the word of wood-fired cooking, and that's they exactly, yeah, that's because of Vitor Argenzones. Yeah, and if we're talking one specific dish, that's really hard. I mean, I guess, paella is the classic, and it's a one that everybody knows, but they're often really disappointed by because they have it outside of Valencia, where it is just being done for tourists and not done with a lot of love or care. So I would say, it is a great dish, and the paella is also the pan as well as the dish. So, sometimes you'll find things that are cooked in a paella which aren't maybe the dish that you were expecting. But I would, go to Valencia and try it in the place that it was born and where it's still really strong part of the culture. And I think you will really enjoy it.
Oh, that sounds sensational. And the drink you must have in your hand multiple times before you leave.
Oh, again, there's just so many. I mean, if you're in the south, obviously it's Jerez or sherry, but there's also great wine in the south as well, that has really, individual grapes that you won't find, like Palomino Fino, which is often used to make sherry, but is used to make white wine as well, which has a really distinctive flavor and is really delicious. But then obviously in the north, you've got Rioja, which makes these really powerful reds, which are really delicious as well. But then there's cider in Asturias and the Basque country. There's a really strong culture of cider houses, which have often been around for hundreds of years in the same family. They make a really distinctive, funky, lightly sparkling cider that maybe some people don't love, but I find really refreshing. Beer culture is huge as well. A lot of people will just go out and have a beer, what they call a caña, which is a small glass of beer.
It's just so civilized, isn't it? You can have a caña at lunchtime and it picks you up for the rest of the afternoon
and people
sightseeing.
People don't, I feel like they have a much better, style of drinking in Spain. It's not to get drunk, but everybody does drink. They drink a lot. Like you go out for breakfast and you'll see people standing at the bar having a beer. But the idea is not to get hammered. It's always with some food as well. And that's just kind of what you do.
I've got one last question. What is the most bizarre situation you found yourself in your travels? And I know you'll have had so many, so it's really hard to settle on just one.
It is, yeah, this is a tricky one. I was having a think, I was trying to decide. I was in a situation in Ethiopia once, in a town called Lalibela, which has these rock-hewn churches, which are basically churches that have been chiseled out of one piece of rock, and they've gone down all the way, like 2 stories down, to make these. They're absolutely amazing. They're like, Petra in Jordan is so famous, but hardly anyone knows about Lalibela, and they're just as impressive to me. And so I went to this place, but it's really hard to get to. Even from Addis Ababa, you have to fly in a light plane for quite a while. And so I was staying in Lalibela to see these churches. And when I'd finished, I went back down to catch my flight, and it was a little bit cloudy, and the plane from Addis Ababa couldn't land. And so they said, well, that's, you could hear it circling overhead, and then it disappeared again. And everyone's like, okay, well, it's not coming today, so you have to go back to your hotel. Like, well, okay, well, I don't have a hotel. And essentially the bizarre nature of this is that it just kept happening day after day. I ended up being in Lalibela for 5 days, and it's a small town. There's not really much to do there. Everybody gets to, like, after a while, I would go down to the airport and look around, hear the plane come past and hear it disappear again, go back up to town, and locals would be like, hey, Ben, you're still here? I'm like, yep, still here. And I ended up getting to know this little town really well. I ended up going to watch football with all these locals. This guy took me to his house to have a coffee ceremony, which is a really integral part of Ethiopian culture, and which I thought was a thing that I would then have to pay for. And he was like, no, I'm just sharing my culture with you. I wanted you to come and see this. And so, yeah, like it felt weird to be there. Like I felt like I shouldn't be there. And there were other places that I was supposed to be at the time. And it was all just a bit bizarre, but at the same time, really rewarding to actually stay in a spot that no one stays in for very long and really get to know it. So it ended up being a really good experience.
I reckon being stranded on a small Ethiopian town for 5 days qualifies as a bizarre. Thanks again, Ben. It was really lovely to have you with us.
Great chat, Belle. And you can find Ben at Ben Groundwater on Instagram or on his website, bengroundwater.com.
Our tip this week is all about surviving long-haul flights. We're talking airline lounges. Recently, I dropped into Al Marjan, which is one of Qatar Airways' business class lounges in Doha's Hamad Airport. It was crazy luxurious. There was a vast black marble pool in the middle of the lounge. I'd already had 2 flights to get from central Turkey down to Doha and back home to Australia. So it was heaven to have a shower, a sit-down dinner of sushi and roasted salmon, a little cheeky blush champagne.
Nice. But did you swim, Belle?
No. The pool was purely for good looks and serenity. But Hamad Airport does have a 25-metre swimming pool, which you can book into.
So what about people who actually aren't flying business class and can't get into those lounges?
Yeah, that lounge is definitely top tier. But actually, if you're in economy, you can buy a pass to enter. It's a pretty steep 188 Australian dollars. But a hot trend in airports is the rise of non-airline affiliated lounges, which are pay as you go. So you can join as a member, or some give you on-the-spot offers. I was in Brunei recently and I saw a lounge which was $25, and that gets you a shower, snacks, Wi-Fi. You'd spend that much in the extremely uninspiring food courts in that airport. And if you're carrying MasterCard or Amex cards, some of them include 2 lounge passes a year, or they offer good walk-in deals. So take a look at the Plaza Premium Group. You've got the Mahaba lounges. There's one of those here in Melbourne, and the Swiss-owned Aspire network, which has 64 lounges worldwide, including Sydney and Melbourne.
That's pretty good, actually, $25 a day for to get you into those lounges. But outside of airport lounges, most city airports do also have nap rooms and showers. And when I went to Japan, we were going to Shikoku Island via Tokyo, and it was such a godsend between flights to be able to have a shower, even just in the using the bathroom rather than having a full airport lounge. It's obviously not quite the same as having Wi-Fi and food and the bar access. But if you just after a freshen up, I think it was only about $15, and so that's obviously much cheaper than paying annual lounge access. And because obviously if you do the math, then if you're not flying multiple times a year, you're probably not going to recoup that cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
This week, I'm chatting to Lisa Pagotto, founder and CEO of Crooked Compass, about her recent trip to Nauru, about how this tiny island country, northeast of Australia, is shaking its reputation as a detention centre, and how tourism is so paramount to its recovery. Lisa also covers some lesser-known destinations that are in demand post-pandemic. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a bit about how you came to start Crooked Compass.
I started Crooked Compass back in 2014. It came about after I'd spent some time traveling overseas myself. I had been in the travel industry for quite some time at that point in various roles. And when I got those itchy feet and headed overseas to do the backpacker thing, for me, I wasn't interested in doing what everybody else was doing. I wasn't interested in boozing my way through Western Europe. And what I wanted to see was places that were extremely different to what we had back at home. The first country that I went to was Tunisia in North Africa. And I was just completely blown away. It was the first Arabic country that I'd ever been to, first Muslim country. I'd never heard call to prayer before. And everything just completely blew my mind. And I just wanted to know more. I wanted to see more. And so I spent that first year traveling to places like India and Turkey. I did 2 months traveling through Africa on my way back to Australia. And I was just fascinated in wanting to do what other people hadn't done. I wanted to see the lesser known. And when I returned to Australia, I went back into the travel industry, and I never really quite found my click. I had various roles and I enjoyed them, but there was something missing. I just wasn't quite fulfilled. And then I realized that there weren't really any travel companies in the Australian market that catered for the style of travel that I sought. Nobody really focused on experiential travel and steering away from the tourist traps and getting under the skin of a destination. The movement of experiential travel hadn't quite hit the market here yet. And that was how I traveled. And I thought, if I want to travel like this, surely there's other people out there who want to travel like this too. And so I had a breadth of experience across sales and marketing and product development, and started Crooked Compass it was a travel app in the beginning, and that was first launched with 1,000 outside the box unique experiences that you couldn't find on Google. And from that, it basically developed and expanded into becoming a very small portfolio at the beginning of just 6 small group tours focusing on some of the lesser known reaches of the planet and doing travel a little differently. And here we are almost 10 years later, and we've got over 100 small group tours focusing on exactly that.
Fantastic. And you've just returned from Nauru. So Australians obviously would see that as synonymous as a detention centre, but tell us a bit about that trip and a bit about what that destination's like and why you were over there.
Yeah, sure. So I guess for a bit of context before we jump into Nauru, one of the things that has sort of solidified itself with Crooked Compass is really focusing on those places that are often quite controversial or quite stigmatized, and using travel as an education tool to really break down those barriers. And Nauru is a perfect example of that. As you said, so many Australians hear the word Nauru and just automatically think of asylum seekers, where there is so many different layers of history to Nauru. A lot of people would have absolutely no idea that it was actually occupied by the Germans back in the 1930s, and it was called Pleasant Island back then because of how pleasant it was being in the middle of the Pacific. And then it was taken over by the Japanese in World War II. So obviously as a strategic point being in the Central Pacific there, but in terms of relics and history, you know, you go to Nauru and the island, the country is so small. It's 21 square kilometres. And across the island, you've got, you know, anti-aircraft military guns still on their nests that haven't been touched. You can still find shells and artillery walking through, you know, the bush. There's underground hospitals, there's underground prisons, there's a German communication center, which ended up being used as a gas chamber. There's all these different layers of varying history that are right there for you to discover that are just completely untouched and being strangled by the overtaking jungle. And then further to that, you've got the controversy around the phosphate mine, which made Nauru the richest country in the world per capita in the 60s. And now with the decline of that mine, it's now the second poorest country in the world per capita. So that's, I guess, a little bit more of modern day history, but another layer that is super fascinating. You know, the mine was abandoned a few years ago. It's now operating again by Nauruans. And, you know, the controversy around that is the health issues that it poses with the dust from the phosphate. It's also left this incredible landscape. Once the phosphate has been mined, it's left these limestone pinnacles, which are just, they're quite eerie, but quite spectacular. You know, Nauru is ringed by a 200-metre wide reef that is just pierced with this scattering of limestone pinnacles. And to snorkel between that, the water is pristine. It's crystal clear and it's beautiful. So it's a naturally beautiful island as well. And then, yes, of course, on top of that is the Regional Processing Centre is its official name, which is where the asylum seekers were living whilst they were being processed. So whilst we were there were 8 asylum seekers still in the centre who have now all been transferred out to Australia. So the processing centre is actually not operating anymore. That was a huge lifeline for Nauru. And the Australian government are keeping it open just in case. It's operated by an American company at the moment. So there's a little bit of controversy around that as well. But interestingly, and what a lot of people don't realise, is that once the asylum seekers were processed and became refugees and obtained that refugee status, a lot of them actually stayed living in Nauru. Life was simple. You know, they operated businesses, barbers, beautician shops, and even little bars along the beach. So they assimilated, and the Nauruan government helped them integrate into that sort of island culture life, which is quite fascinating and a lot of things that people just wouldn't be aware of.
And what do the locals think about? Because obviously they wouldn't be used to tourism. So what is that like? What do the locals think about that? Because obviously the government there has announced that that's going to be a push for them to, you know, obviously for economic reasons. So, but what did you find when you were on the ground? What the locals were saying about that?
Yeah, sure. So tourism is a huge unknown in Nauru. It's not something that they've ever had before. I mean, in terms of experiences, things to see, things to learn about, it's absolutely there in droves. And the tourism board is literally one person with 5 volunteers that make up the corporation. And these this handful of people have this incredible entrepreneurial spirit. They can see that they've got something special, and it's quite unique compared to any other Pacific island. So they're quite hungry to develop something, obviously looking at it as a new revenue for their economy, because Nauru doesn't really have an economy now without the mine and without the processing centre operating the way that they did in the past. So when you speak to locals, they don't actually really understand tourism. The country literally has 2 hotels. One has 8 rooms and the other one has 210 rooms, which used to be where the miners lived that came in when Australia was managing the mine. They only have about 5 rooms that are actually in operation now. The rest are pretty much derelict. So the infrastructure for tourism is not quite there, but the concept and the understanding of what's possible is. So it's very much in its infancy stages, which makes it really exciting, but it's also a big unknown for the local people. They don't know yet the benefit of what tourism can bring to an economy, both obviously from the financial perspective, but also from a jobs perspective. So that there's a lot of unknowns, and this group of people who are starting the tourism board, they've got a big job ahead of them to educate and to show the power and the benefits of bringing tourism as an economy into a country that is really starting to struggle.
Yeah. And look, you've got tours going there, which we'll put on the show notes. But what do people who want to go there need to be prepared for? Like, what if I was wanting to go there, and because of, like you just explained, the fact that it's not like going to your typical Pacific Island destination. So what do people know if they want to go to this micronation? What should they be prepared for if they're traveling to a place like Nauru?
Yeah, sure. So Nauru, it's pure adventure. It is, as you say, not like any other Pacific island. There is very little infrastructure. There is one road that goes around the entire country. To access some of these relics that I mentioned, there are no cleared paths and boardwalks and lit up pavements and that sort of thing. It is sometimes scrambling. It is sometimes climbing. So you do need a sense of adventure. You need to be very open-minded that, like any island, it does operate on island time, and that it is a nation that is very new to the world of tourism. So it's not structured. It's not itinerary says at 9 o'clock you will be here. It is very much you're led by the locals, and the locals are fueled by the questions that you ask. If you don't ask questions, they won't know where to take you. It's still very much in its infancy stages, which for the right type of traveller is very exciting because you can help shape that. But for that person that expects to follow a set itinerary and that expects a guide to turn up on time, then it's probably not the destination for you.
What are some of the other destinations that people are now seeking post-pandemic? Because we had talked earlier about, you were saying that the rebound of people wanting to go off-grid had really surprised you. So what are some of the places that people are seeking now?
Absolutely. We've seen this huge wave of people wanting to get to those more extreme, more remote regions. When borders first reopened last year, we saw an uplift in travel to the Middle East, and in particular places like Saudi Arabia, the island of Yemen, which is off the coast of Oman, and the island of Socotra, I should say, which is off the coast of Yemen and Oman, and places that I guess have always been a bucket list type destination for travellers, but having travel stripped away for, 2.5 years, all of a sudden there's this urgency of, I need to get there now just in case things change. So we continuously see, some borders are still closed. North Korea still has their border closed, but we're getting inquiries for people wanting to be the first to be able to get back into that country when it opens. These extreme destinations are really piquing a lot of people's interests.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
It
okay,
is.
well, to wrap up, because we're unfortunately running out of time, but the question that we are asking our guests is, what's the most bizarre situation you've found yourself in during your travels?
Oh, there's so many. I wouldn't even know where to start. Some of them are, a bit inappropriate. Some of them are probably a bit stupid. There was a trip that I did. It was a combination of South Korea and Kenya, a bit of an odd combination, but anyway, that's what we did. And I took a group, and this just seemed to be the trip where everything went wrong for me. I injured myself with first night fever on a night out in Seoul, and then when we flew to Nairobi the next day, I was violently ill on arrival. We got out to a game park, and the group went out on their first safari while I was rocking myself in a corner, and everybody came back and everyone was very quiet. And I thought, oh, something's not right here. And then I found out that they'd seen a cheetah sitting on the roof of one of the safari vehicles, and there was a family in it. It was a pop-up top, and the photos are incredible and just something that you could not plan. So I missed out on that. Then I sort of came good for a few days, then went backwards again. And as we were leaving Kenya, we were driving to a private airstrip to catch a charter plane back to Nairobi, and we broke an axle on our four-wheel drive vehicle, and it was just not drivable. So we literally had to grab our luggage, run across the national park to get to the little hut at the airstrip, and hope that there were no predators lurking in the bush. And then just when you kind of thought that all the drama was over, we flew back to Korea. I got incredibly ill on the plane again and had to be wheeled off in a wheelchair. And the group went off to go and see the cherry blossoms because it was cherry blossom season, while I again stayed rocking myself in a corner and missed out on another highlight of what was an incredible trip. So funny now in hindsight, but at the time completely devastated with with how that trip played out.
Oh gosh, the adventures.
That's right.
So it's a good story to tell now.
Now.
Look, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Lisa.
No problems at all. Thank you so much.
That was a really inspiring chat with Lisa Pagotto, and you can follow her at Crooked Compass on Instagram and Facebook and explore some of the destinations that she's now taking people to, and it really is quite mind-blowing.
And that brings to a close the World Awaits podcast this week. For more stories, click to subscribe anywhere you listen to your favourite pods, or visit us at theworldawaits.au. And where can people find you, Kirstie?
I'm at Kirstie Writes on Insta and Facebook. That's KIRSTIE Writes. And how about you, Belle?
You'll find me at globalsalsa.com. Thanks for listening. See you next week.